What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. This is the Elder Scrolls podcast. I'm Scott here with Michael and Drew as always, and today we are talking all about the Dark Brotherhood. Ooh.
Yeah, so probably the favorite faction of a lot of people listening to this, potentially, right? And one of the fondest ones.
It's the Edgelord
faction, and I have a lot of fond memories of this faction, especially starting out with that quest line back in Oblivion, and of course going through Skyrim and other Elder Scrolls games. It's a guild that obviously, as we know in the lore, has started to die out, but I can't really see it not being in Elder Scrolls 6, just from pure fan appeal. But they are basically an order of assassins. Oh, you
never know. We might get surprised, and they might actually do something a little more creative.
I'm all down.
They'll be back in some form or another. They'll be back because the Void is always hungry for souls. Always. That's what Sithis himself says. You know. So
I don't know if Sithis says.
Well,
much,
yeah. Sorry,
honestly.
he doesn't directly. He doesn't like say it to the mic or anything.
Quote Sithis.
You know, he like supposedly says it to the Night Mother.
Yeah.
But yeah, so look, they may have something, like say it's set in Hammerfell, you could really see some like specifically like Hammerfell deity themed assassin group. 100% you could see that.
And you could just get the nod. You could have Nazir return as like a person you do a quest with on one occasion, and then
that all sounds great. I'm just saying, based on what we've seen, like chucking the Brotherhood of Steel into Fallout 76, you better believe the Dark Brotherhood is going to be in Elder Scrolls 6. I just can't see them not doing it. It's such a fan.
It's kind of cringe, man.
Well, I think the Morag Tong will be in the Elder Scrolls 6.
Really? Why?
I mean, no, like not necessarily in Hammerfell, but there's good reason to believe that they're going to come back strong as time progresses.
Okay.
Because, I mean, we'll get into it, but there's a lot of, theories relating to, how much the Tribunal were a part of causing the Morag Tong's downfall and whatnot. And now the Tribunal are not around anymore. Things are changing. We see a little bit in Dragonborn as well, but...
Okay. Well, we should probably preface this with the Dark Brotherhood that you're familiar with. They're a big assassins guild. They're a giant death cult who worship the Dreadfather Sithis and this figure called the Night Mother. And beyond that, though, they are just a bunch of assassins who are rather pragmatic and just take money. It's not like... I wouldn't consider their a religiosity the same as some other cults and stuff. They're fairly loose, like you see, and that's why they have such a sort of ragtag bunch of killers from all over the place. Most of the members are like, yeah, I like killing, so I joined up with the Dark Brotherhood because yummy killing.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how you join in Oblivion, for example. You just kill someone, kill anyone, and you get visited in the night. You're hardly going to become a devout worshipper of Sithis or the Night Mother, in a day.
Yeah.
They basically have talent scouts that go around finding the coolest murders and just track you down. It's effective.
And I think that's overall, that's the Dark Brotherhood, in my opinion, as a faction, is pretty just an edgelord lackluster sort of thing. But the thing is, they've always had such a good cast of characters, and they've also had some of the best quests and most fun quests, and that's why they are so popular. Not because Dark Brotherhood, Sithis, this is so cool and edgy. It's all of the characters and quests that make it what it is.
That's why in Elder Scrolls 6 they really could just do anything with the new Assassin's Guild, have all the same cool type of quests, have a really cool bunch of characters, and I don't think anyone can really complain.
Yeah.
Get some cool outfits.
Absolutely.
Well, and as edgy as they are, there's something about an Assassin's Guild that is it's just so crucial to Mundus and the mortal realm. The way it kind of all began, it's if you think about it, during the Dawn times or going into the Malefic times, where you got all these mortals who venerate the Aedra and they follow Trinimac and Auriel and whatever they say, and then you get Mephala and Boethia coming out of nowhere, just no, let's flip this on its head. Let's shame these gods and show you that through treachery and deception you can make just about anything happen. Just shoving that chaos into this realm that kind of has become more chaotic as it goes and is less orderly. And you see it with the Kai'Ma when they move away and they're taught assassination and foul murder, as we see foul murder happen a bit. over there. But yeah, and it's like that's how we get to the Dark Brotherhood, and Mephala is always somewhat involved.
Well, I guess we can probably start talking about the origins, and we can sort of like preface this with that the Dark Brotherhood sort of come into appearance in Tamriel during the Second Era, around like year 300-ish kind of thing. I think their approximate dates like 358, something like that.
Yeah.
So after the assassination of Versailles Shay, and before him, Riemann III, by the Morag Tong. So there's a few theories about how the Dark Brotherhood came about, and I think one of the more compelling ones is that they are a offshoot of the Morag Tong, and the sort of schism happened, and there's various reasons behind why that could have happened, and there's some theories. So did you guys want to start on some of this?
Well, I could.
Well, one. I'll go.
I was going to say there's some things you could start with that I don't think it is. Like, you could kind of remove some of the theories. So there's one where it's there's a story about it kind of being an offshoot from the Thieves Guild, where a bunch of thieves realized it was just easier to steal from their targets if they were allowed to kill them. And it kind of went from there. It's like, wow, this is way easier when we just murder our targets and then steal from them.
Yeah. I feel like that's the writer's way of just sort of like adding in more theories quickly to just make sure that there is no one definitive story. But even though that the Morag Tong one is far more compelling, or do you know what I mean? They're just trying to cloud it in obscurity, but it's kind of unlikely, or at least it's not cool. It doesn't fit the theme. It's a really boring start.
Yeah, and all of that just comes from one woman who is interviewed by this one guy, and it's like, yeah, it doesn't really connect to anything else. Yeah. And it's it'd be boring if that were somehow the actual answer. But then again, it's probably even if that were to have happened, that this woman was like, why don't we strangle the people we steal from? Even if that did happen, it almost wouldn't take away from the other causes, the domino effect that led to the Dark Brotherhood.
Yeah, it's probably important too to establish now that the Dark Brotherhood, in the contemporary sense, they don't at least seem to acknowledge kind of any connection to the Morag Tong, or it doesn't seem like they have similar roots, or like on the surface it doesn't seem like it. Like they all seem very secular is a funny word for them, but they are just, it really is just Sithis and this sort of Night Mother. And the Night Mother to them is this woman that was she started off by, she heard the Dread Father's voice and so on, and then she supposedly bore his children and then killed them all. I think it was 5 of them. I think that's to symbolize the hand. And then obviously the village, or because I'm pretty sure the story takes place in Breville, I think. Yeah. I can't quite remember, but regardless, the story is then they all come and kill her for what she did. But then the first listener started hearing like her voice is the Night Mother's voice, and she's supposed to be the one who's like delivering the will of her husband, the Dread Father, Sithis. So it's all through the Night Mother, which is important to remember, because there are lots of things about the Night Mother potentially being just another apparition of Mephala, like another aspect or something.
Well, that's the thing. Like, the Morag Tong took care of sending, or like of killing people for so long that, if you excuse my choice of words, it's like when they disappeared, it kind of left a void that needed to be filled by something. And I mean, like, it's really, we're not going to talk too much about the Morag Tong, but it's really out of character for them that the turning point was the assassination of Versailles Shay. And afterwards, it almost seems like whoever did it was in some way kind of like being possessed by just something or other, even if you mean that in a metaphorical sense, and scrawled the words Morag Tong on the walls after, like, in the blood of this potentate. And after that, it's like, even though everybody knew that the Morag Tong were active, it was the point where everyone's like, no, we're not going to accept this anymore, and we're going to all outlaw it at the same time. And as a result, it makes sense that something like the Dark Brotherhood's going to come along, because it was missing, and it is a necessary part.
But to be honest, what's kind of weird, like I agree with what you're saying, but it's kind of weird because there's this idea that you can read about where somebody, can't remember who, but they're saying like, oh, the Dark Brotherhood would never kill an emperor because then they'd have the whole empire on them and it would be catastrophic for them and they wouldn't be tolerated anymore, because they are kind of tolerated as much as they're illegal. Like they're not a super high priority for the Empire and other provinces to deal with, for example. But but emperors have been killed before. So Pelagius was killed, Pelagius the First, right? Praying in the temple of the One.
So that's Tiber Septim's grandson, and that resulted in the passing of the Septim line to Tiber Septim's brother's daughter. So that's kind of like the little thing. That's the end of his direct
As we
line,
know in
honestly.
Skyrim, we don't know what the canon is, but if we assume that the canon is all of the faction quest lines get done by somebody, whether it's the Dragonborn or just, the listener or whoever, the Emperor gets killed there again. So it's kind of weird to think that the Morag Tong, even though that's kind of the story, were looked at in a bad way after killing a potentate, when really the Dark Brotherhood have done similar stuff.
I think you could almost say it's like a good piece of advice for the Dark Brotherhood is never kill a well-loved emperor. If an emperor is only as powerful as their backing, and say you've got someone else who wants the throne, if you then assassinate that emperor and you've got a bunch of people supporting the person who's going to take over, it's the problem kind of goes away. Whereas with this potentate, it was such a brazen display that you kind of couldn't just sweep it under the rug anymore. You couldn't just have some guy come in and wash the walls.
After having Riemann III and him dead, like, people were scared, like, obviously, of the Morag Tonga, and, rightly so. So one of the chief theories is the idea that they're this sort of Mephala worshipping cult, as they sort of always have been, and that basically when Versa Duché came about, there was the Morag Tong basically went... they were in Morrowind, but they basically sought refuge in Morrowind and protection from the Tribunal. And so they end up going to Vivec, which is, the anticipation of Mephala. And Vivec, and they sort of have to agree to worship Vivec instead. Whereas they sort of do still secretly worship Mephala, and in ways they're interlinked because of the anticipation relation. But basically there's this idea that the Dark Brotherhood... came about because, like, no way, we're not dealing with this. We want to keep our cult of murder everywhere, and also not worshipping Vivec. We're not going to swap it out. So then there's the kind of idea that they had this Night Mother that was created, and it's actually Mephala's aspect. So they're worshipping the Mephala, but through another name, through the Night Mother.
The other thing that's worth pointing out is how the Night Mother was actually just the leader of the Dark Brotherhood, like an actual person. So it's kind of like this matriarchal group where the leader is the Night Mother, and you see it in Morrowind. It's a Dunmer lady you can speak to, and in...
I think it's an Imperial lady.
Is it Imperial? Maybe the screenshot was just... Look, the Morrowind graphics. I just looked at the picture.
It's important to clarify. This will help everyone out a lot, but the Dark Brotherhood is a guild that's been made on the fly. Dark Brotherhood in Daggerfall, they had a leader called the Night Mother, and it was sort of just like, the Night Mother's kind of like, just the leader, but not in this sort of ghostly spiritual sense of the story, just like a very physical leader. Same in Morrowind. There was a Dark Brotherhood Night Mother, which was just the leader of that sort of group of Dark Brotherhood. But
just to clarify, it is an Imperial. It is an Imperial. It's just, God, the face is so jagged.
And then in Oblivion, they started introducing this idea of the Night Mother being like the Dreadfather's wife and killing her children, and all that kind of stuff got built. So it kind of got built in retrospect. And so you could kind of maybe, if you wanted to rationalize it, you could say that maybe female leaders of certain sanctuaries and stuff in the past have been called a Night Mother to sort of like honor them or something. But to be honest, it kind of is just retconned. Like, I wouldn't put too much thought into it, especially since ESO, which is, you see a Dark Brotherhood that is so closely, it's only a couple hundred years or something away from its origins. You end up, they have the Night Mother and the whole, like, exactly how it was in Skyrim and Oblivion. So you sort of, you can kind of just dismiss the other Night Mother talk. There's also Night Mother is said to be the leader of the Morag Tong in the Last Year series of books. But once again, that's just, it is just a book. It's like one of those sort of fictional stories about historical events. Like, it's a drama kind of thing. But so it could just be, a mix of words. Also, literally could just be older developer ideas about what the Night Mother is versus now that it's a Dark Brotherhood thing,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in any form, it does just kind of seem to be a vessel that is a way of worshipping Mephala without explicitly saying it. Because, you know, even though Vivek you associate him with Mephala, the tribunal were not really fond of anyone getting too keen on the good Daedra. You know, it was all about them, not about the good Daedra. And you can imagine that would be a bit of a problem for the Tong and the Dark Brotherhood that followed. You know, you can almost see the downfall of the Tong to be almost like, in a way, kind of losing a bit of Mephala's favor. Maybe not necessarily against them, but just as kind of a way of lashing out at the lack of worship she's getting in general. And then the Dark Brotherhood follows, and you get a lot more of it back.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty firmly of the belief that it is a religious schism between the Tong and the Dark Brotherhood, and that's what kind of creates them. There's also like early reference to like it's like a note you found in Skyrim somewhere, not in the game. I think it's in history that references like a war between, like a references talking to someone like brother, and a war between shadowy organizations, and that's sort of thought to be the war between the Dark Brotherhood and Morag Tong, when it was... I actually had it in the video that I made about Microsoft and what they could potentially do with spin-off games. I thought there would be a really cool, like, imagine, you know, like Dishonored, or even Assassin's Creed, but more so like a Dishonored kind of style assassin story game, but set at the formation of the Dark Brotherhood. So like set at the schism, and like maybe even the opening is kind of like you're actually assassinating Versa Duché along with others and so on. And then after there's the sort of whole storyline is establishing the Dark Brotherhood and fighting against Morag Tong.
I feel like I'll become way more open to any suggestions like that once Elder Scrolls 6 is already out. But until then, every time I hear it, I'm just like, no, give me Elder Scrolls 6 instead.
But no, my implication was that Microsoft, that Arcane Studios, the guys that made Dishonored, could make
for sure.
that.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have Bethesda Game Studios doing it. They're not good at that. So
it's just, you know, the game I want. I want Elder Scrolls 6.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to Mephala, I can definitely see it being the kind of religious schism, especially when you consider, like, Mephala wouldn't care. She wouldn't care. She's still getting kind of worship and reverence from both guilds. People are still killing, like, you know, if she's the Daedra of murder and sex and lies, and, you know.
Yeah, well, Eliza's kind of there. It doesn't matter if she's lying, pretending to be this Night Mother.
Exactly.
You know?
It suits her perfectly well, you know, to kind of be in control of both without the Dark Brotherhood at least fully realizing, or at least most of the members. Like, a lot of the members, it's kind of like the companions. A lot of the members aren't really in it for, like, the higher, more metaphysical aspects of the guild. It's just like, oh yeah, I like fighting, or I like being an assassin.
Yeah. And you do get, like, direct examples of Mephala, specifically Mephala, looking out for the Dark Brotherhood. Like, just before the warp in the west, there's like a guy in the Iliac Bay who discovers the location of the hidden Nightside Sanctuary, and Mephala offers the Ebony Blade to the adventurer, who goes and slays him before he can basically spill the secret. So you actively get her protecting the Dark Brotherhood, not just through this other named vessel.
I'm not quite sure, and can't quite be bothered to go back through all of the bits of, like, Daggerfall lore and Arena lore and, like, try and get the sequence of its creation. But I have a feeling that the Morag Tong and Dark Brotherhood were kind of the same thing in Daggerfall, and then they're like, oh, look at the Morag Tong, this is the Morag Tong, and then they kind of like, oh, but we want the Dark Brotherhood as well in the Tribunal DLC, so they kind of... It's one of those...
Fleshed it out afterwards, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I wouldn't put it past. You know, it's the way it works when you're making these games.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I guess we could kind of talk maybe chronologically about some of their things. So after we sort of... there's a mention of... oh my goodness, that name. Almahera of Hegaith. Basically talking about how her grandfather, since the time of her grandfather, they've enlisted the service of the Dark Brotherhood. And this is in 412 of the Second Era. So, and like we said, like, it's probably around 358, 360, something like that. It could, you know, they could have a bit of flexibility with that date, I think. But still... we know since then, but then we get to the events of ESO, the Dark Brotherhood questline, which features you're in the Gold Coast, basically. So they're kind of separated from the Empire because of Varen's wall and stuff. They have what's it called? Fortuna Ap Dugal, right? Is the pirate queen that I can't remember. Sorry, Anvil or Kvatch?
Anvil.
Anvil, and Kvatch is under the, and so you also go to Kvatch and kill the arch primate, right? Of the Order of
Artorias
the
of the Order of the Hour.
Yeah. So that, I mean, outside of that, we know that the Dark Brotherhood there are like pretty established, like, and they've got their whole Night Mother thing going on. So yeah, that happens. They kill a bunch of important people.
They've got some wild armor as well. Some of the pictures, they look like they need to be protecting Snoke as the Praetorian Guard. Seriously. Or you could chuck a lightsaber in their hand and throw them in Knights of the Old Republic and they'd fit right in on the deck of a ship.
Yeah, Power Rangers.
Yeah. It depends. It depends on which assassin. Some of them look more standard, whereas others look a bit over the top, as is often the case in the Elder Scrolls Online with their armor designs.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's yikes. But so I guess their next big significant thing really comes about in the Third Era, because we don't hear too much more about the Dark Brotherhood, and that's when they literally they end the Tiber Septim line by killing Pelagius I, Tiber Septim's grandson, in the Temple of the One. But that meant that Kintyra, who was Tiber Septim's niece, got the throne, but that kind of changes the Septim line and so on. So quite significant role
It's a
there.
cool assassination as well. To me, it has these real Assassin's Creed vibes. Like the fact that he was assassinated while praying in some temple alone and like he gets killed. You can imagine the blood on the temple floor and some shadowy figure fleeing away, and maybe there's some pigeons going around, you know? I can really see it.
The Imperial City would be a good place for that kind of scene. Like, remember the cinematic trailer in Brotherhood? Yeah. But then
Mephala would be pretty pleased about killing an Aedra worshipper at their place of worship.
Yeah.
But then we kind of get to the idea that they had this power struggle over Mehrunes Razor, apparently, because back in Daggerfall lore, like, Mehrunes Razor was kind of associated with them, like, or sought after by them, and that kind of gets, I guess it would be a useful thing for assassins.
The thing that I don't like about it, obviously it's a powerful dagger, but if we're going off the game mechanics, it's this really small chance to instantly kill. So it's kind of like, yay, if I do 50 assassin contracts, one of them will be an instant kill. And it's kind of like, if you're an assassin, pretty much, obviously in game there's things like damage and whatever, but the idea is that if you stab someone in the throat in the Elder Scrolls, even if they have 10,000 health, like, they die. You know, so as an assassin, it seems, I don't know why they would want it so badly.
There is just talking about the differences, one thing to point out is that, and as we'll find out as we go through some of the history, the Dark Brotherhood's kind of theme is that they do kind of take on big figures, and part of the difference, the separation between Morag Tong even could be that the Morag Tong, have to have writs, ordained by the tribunal and so on, and it's kind of like a contained thing for, like, basically dealing with inter-house wars and stuff like that, whereas the Dark Brotherhood split apart because they want to keep murdering, in the name of Mephala, or as the Night Mother later on, but they take on really big targets, and one of the interesting ones is because you actually fight them as, like, antagonists in the Tribunal Questline for Morrowind. And basically, so King Hlalu Helseth, which is the son of Baron Zaya, and Baron Zaya, if we remember, was made like Queen of Morrowind to, like, as a sort of puppet figurehead for the Tiber Septim Empire. And then so you have her son Helseth, right? And then Helseth he's like the king of Morrowind, but they're very, like, imperial backed. It's not to do with the houses so much, and it's part of that transition. But basically that Helseth organized the Dark Brotherhood to assassinate you, the Nerevrine, because you could potentially, after doing what you did, and defeating Dagothr and stuff, like, he didn't want you to challenge his rule. And then later on, they also make an attempt on Baron Zaya's life, so on, and the plot goes on. But you basically thwart them as the Nerevrine. But, like, that's a pretty, after knowing who the Nerevarine is and doing what the Nerevarine did, like going after the Nerevarine is also a pretty big target.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, tying this back to the Razor, all of what we're saying right here, as much as Mephala might hate me for saying it, is very characteristic of Mehrunes Dagon. Like that. The Dark Brotherhood and the Morag Tong, they're kind of, they serve Mephala and Sithis, and it's all about it's chaos, it's change, it's taking out leaders who may be completely unchallenged if you don't have assassination. And Mehrunes Dagon, even though he's not associated with either of these guilds, is gonna love the relevance of these guilds and how they can take care of leaders who might not be so good.
The assassination facilitates the revolution.
Exactly. And you can also imagine, actually, there's a reason they would like the Razor if they are going after some high-profile targets that kind of have more strength than your typical mortal. For example, the Dragonborn. If they wanted to kill a Dragonborn, you'd feel a lot better about it with a Daedric artifact in your hands.
Or going after high-profile targets like Grelod the Kind.
Yeah, but I mean, they do come for you in Skyrim if you do wrong by them.
That's another thing too to sort of point out is actually what the source of their assassinations are. It's through legal writs in the Morag Tong, whereas there's this very hazy cultic sort of black sacrament which basically goes to the Night Mother, and the Night Mother hears it and then gives those missions to the listener and speaks to the listener, and then
so that's where the Black Hand comes in. You've got the listener who receives word from the Night Mother, and then the 4 speakers who will kind of assign assassins to go and take care of these jobs. So which is why we'll get into it, but why people like Cicero will freak out if there's no listener present. There's no one to take the Night Mother's will, and essentially the Dark Brotherhood can only operate on hearsay, which isn't quite as badass as their black sacraments.
Yeah, and it kind of, as it talks about in some of the texts, and I think in his journal, that it reduces the legitimacy of the Dark Brotherhood, because if they're, because obviously they're going through a pretty heavy downfall, if they're not fulfilling their contracts, the black sacrament almost becomes myth. It's like, oh, maybe it works, So that's why when they're talking about, there was this argument as the Dark Brotherhood was facing troubles in the 4th era of kind of like, should we expand or should we consolidate? And I would be in favor of the expansion, to be honest. As much as they were facing troubles, there's no point in even having the guild if you're not fulfilling contracts in different places. The Dark Brotherhood, the Black Sacrament only works in Cyrodiil. It's like, okay.
Yeah. The one quick thing, we'll pelt through some of the 3rd era stuff before we get to the 4th era stuff, because that's where there's going to be some really interesting discussion. But the 3rd era, there is this, I think people might want to know this Graywin Blenwith character who basically started, he was part of the Dark Brotherhood and started a crusade against them to remove all non-vampires from the Brotherhood, and they were known as he founded an organization called the Crimson Scars. This is this little bit of lore that was added in for
the Vile Lair.
Deep Scorn Hollow.
It's a Vile Lair expansion for Oblivion.
I think it's called Deep Scorn Hollow, that like the actual name of the place, but I can't. Yeah. But anyway, so it's just basically a little cool story to facilitate why this place is here and so on. He fails, obviously. And, you never hear about the Crimson Scars again. It's literally just that tiny little piece of info. But then let's move on to the actual Oblivion questline with characters such as Lucian Lachance and such. So you basically get recruited. And when you kill Rufio, well, not necessarily your character, but someone. And that results in the purification. The long line of quest lines of killing results in the purification of the Shadenhall Sanctuary.
One big game of Among Us between all the members of the Dark Brotherhood.
I like the idea as well that the Whodunit quest, which comes not too long before, was actually you being prepared to do the purification. Like they put you in this party house to kill off everyone without the people inside knowing that you're the one killing everyone. so that
Yeah.
Lucien Lachance can kind of say, okay, he's ready to do the purification. It's like training. I think that's such a cool theory. I'd love to make a video on it, but I don't know how to say more than just that. You know, it's kind of like I'm sure I could make a video about the quest because I just love it so much. But yeah.
And then there's the Matthew Bellamont guy, and he was the imposter. Well, I mean, what an effort! Because it's basically his mum gets killed by the Dark Brotherhood, and then he goes and joins them in this big quest to get his ultimate revenge and bring the whole faction down.
It's such an effort. It is such an effort,
Yeah.
and his diary is so creepy. Although in parts of his diary, it just feels like the writers were like, "Oh, what can we do that's like creepy? Oh, let's write backwards. Lucien Lachance must die." But there is some things in there. Anytime the word mummy is used in a creepy text, it's just like, ugh.
Yeah. Well, then there is. I know some people say like the next 200 years are sort of bad for the Brotherhood, but I don't think it gets particularly bad really until kind of close to the Great War period, which is sort of the end of that. Like, it's reasonable to assume, I guess, that they were pretty fine for the first century, or kind of continuing as they were in varying degrees. But it wasn't really until the Great War and some of the big the outfall, what do you call it? Not outfall. What's the word? Anyway, look, the results, the results of the Great War, that caused some stuff. So if you guys want to take the reins on some of that, this is all stuff we find out through Cicero's journal.
Yeah, Cicero's journal, which is kind of a gradual degeneration into madness. He kind of talks about. I'll have to bring it up, but talks about how he gets displaced and he moves to the Shadenhal Sanctuary, and just people stop returning until the point where it's just him alone. And he documents they stop being active in Hammerfell. There's the Argonians stop training recruits
in Archon,
and
for
then
the Shadow Scales,
for the Shadow Scales, and then what's the location in
Breville Falls
in
as
Elsewhere?
well.
Yeah, Breville
I think
Falls,
it's Corinth and Elsewhere.
the Corinth Sanctuary, and it gets to the point where it's pretty much just Dawnstar is a potential for the future, but you've just got the Forests of Falkreath, and
it's pretty much all like kind of rioting or drug wars or stuff like that are causing a lot of the problems. Like, you know, it ends up being we have the Garnag character who goes to Breville, and he just manages to basically rescue. I think he even loses his eye in the ordeal to rescue the Night Mother's coffin and with her, and brings it back, and then you have Cicero become the keeper, and the last person he killed was a jester, and then he kind of goes nuts and sort of takes on the identity of this jester.
The idea is that the laughter of the jester fills the void, and that Cicero is constantly listening to this silence, but then instead his silence gets replaced by the laughter of this jester, which is kind of, you can imagine him obsessing over being an assassin, because he talks about how, you know, that's why he joined. He wanted to kill. And then they basically like give him the job where it's like, oh, there's so much honor to this job, but it's like the most boring one, like clearing out insects and rodents from the Night Mother's corpse and oiling it up and all this kind of like
sensory.
Yeah.
To an extent, it's almost not the Dark Brotherhood's fault that they're going through a lot of this, because they kind of seem to be getting abandoned. You know, that no listener is being chosen. No one's there to hear the Night Mother, if she's even speaking at all. So it's like the question becomes like, why is there no communication happening anymore? And you get to the point where one of the members, whose name you'll remind me of, claims to become the listener.
Rasha.
Raj, and essentially they're like, okay, well, if you're the listener, what's the secret password? And he's like, oh, I don't know it. So they kill him. It's like, good attempt, man. You probably could have thought that through a little bit more.
And they go without a listener for a while. Like
I calculated as well. It seems to take Cicero about 3 to 4 months to go insane. Like when you read his, not insane, but there's this big skip in his diary entries where he kind of goes from like kind of teetering on the edge, and then it's like, okay, now he's just nuts.
Yeah. And then, as we know, Astrid was sort of running a sanctuary in Falkreath and sort of just kind of diverging a little bit and trying to run the Dark Brotherhood without a listener, trying to keep up the image, and then you come, and then you're the listener, and Cicero comes back with it. You've played the storyline. It all results in another big purging of Dark Brotherhood characters by the Panitas Oculatus, and then we end up with the Emperor's assassination. And basically you only have Nazir, Babette, and a few others in the Dawnstar Sanctuary left, but the Dark Brotherhood does survive, and I think that would be
I just found the quote. So he's going crazy with the laughter in his head and stuff. Not like crazy, kind of crazy. But then there's the one entry is like, it's not safe to leave the sanctuary. We'll stay here. All is well. And then the next entry is just like, Garnag is gone. Left to get food, but he'll be back. It's only been 3 months. 3 months, 3 months, 12 moths, 4 sloths. And you're just like, okay. All right. Cool meme entry.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny how Babette gets to survive the purging of this Dark Brotherhood, because obviously children are immune.
Yeah.
They've got plot armor in the Elder Scrolls, but she's not exactly a child.
No, she's
so
not.
you'd think she might not be so safe, but then again, maybe she's just very skilled and evasive, or maybe was just like, no, please don't murder me.
She was a really cool. She was a cool character addition to the Dark Brotherhood. That's one thing. Maybe it's just nostalgia or so on, but some of the Oblivion ones, I think I just remember them more because I played them as a kid. But I was kind of disappointed that again they did just kill off pretty much all the characters except Babette and Nazir. Like, I wish they kind of. If they do have the Dark Brotherhood in the next one, I really hope it's not just another purification and kill.
Yeah,
Like,
I was a little bit disappointed with that as well. I am willing to make a video as well. You know how I made one comparing the Thieves Guild of Skyrim and Oblivion? I would love to go back and do a Dark Brotherhood one just to see if Oblivion lives up to the hype and the nostalgia in my brain. I know it's good, but people will say it's so much better than Skyrim's, and
I think by default it has a longer quest line. Like, there's more quests in Oblivion, which
but it
helps
would just be
a lot.
fun to go through it. The thing with Skyrim is a lot of the quests are these contracts that you get from Nazir. And they can be interesting, but what they did in Oblivion was they kind of characterized the contracts a lot more by making them main quests. Like killing, I think he's called Balin in Bruma, the Bosma guy with the big Nord guard. That's not a crazy quest. If you think about it, you sneak into a house, go upstairs and loosen the fastenings of a thing and then leave. Like, it's a pretty simple murder. And, I'm sure being sent to a farm in Skyrim to kill some farmer who's actually like a vampire could have been made so much more interesting if there was more background, more this, more that. But instead, it just feels a little bit more like a Radiant quest than like a well thought out thing. And even in Oblivion, you have these little extra things where I think his name's Grom off the top of my head, but the guard to this guy who failed is upset, and you find him in the bar later drinking his sorrows away and stuff like that.
I think too, I can't even remember if there is much in Skyrim, but for the most part in Skyrim, I think you can kind of just kill them. Whereas in Oblivion, if you killed them the specified way, or the way that that the contract giver or something wanted it to be done, you would often get like a better like reward or something. Because I remember getting like Sufferthorn, this like little enchanted elven dagger for
and like the scales of
quest
pitiless justice, the deceiver's finery.
In Skyrim,
rewards.
when you kill Vittoria Vici, you can do that by pushing the statue onto her, can't you? But is there any, which is really cool, but is there any, does that come up in dialogue or reward in any way? I don't think it does.
No, I think it's just an option, which I appreciate. It's cool.
There are still bonuses in Skyrim. I believe they're just more monetary. I can remember dialogue about bonuses, but it's not the same.
So I am interested, Drew. You were saying earlier about why you think the Morak Tong's going to come back in their relation to the Dark Brotherhood. I'm curious what your take on this is.
It all stems basically from the change, the huge divergence in Morrowind's culture when the Tribunal rise to power. Because, the way I see it is when Mephala, Boethiah, and Azura are essentially creating these changed ones and teaching them how to live, Mephala has kind of set in motion an institution that is just like, she doesn't even need to do anything. It's just going to permanently there's going to be lots of deception and murder and assassination, and plenty of souls are flowing, people being killed, and then it's all focused around her as well. But then you get the tribunal come along, who essentially just push them all aside, and they take all the attention, to the point where if the Morag Tong are going to continue to operate, I mean, you know what the Ordinators are like when it comes to religious dissidents as well. The Morag Tong doesn't want to be forced to really secretly worship their god, and a lot of them probably did just turn to worshipping the tribunal. But with the events of Morrowind, and the tribunal being gone and the reclamations coming back, a resurgence in the Morag Tong, especially with the Dark Brotherhood consistently falling apart, it really seems like a good time for the Morag Tong to just rise to prominence again.
Because they're the alternative. And especially, I guess, if you run with the Dunmer refugee ideas or so on, you could have like a broader network, that you have a reason to expand your network beyond just Morrowind.
It was all a Morag Tong ploy. Let's erupt Red Mountain so we can send dark elves across the land, have an excuse to get our assassins in places. Yeah, I don't think so.
Because to clarify, the Morag Tong were all even in Morrowind, it says they're all still attached to Mephala and so on, but I think it really is recognizing the tribunal, and basically even maybe it's less of a reverence scenario, but or at least publicly more of a reverence for that kind of thing, or a just sort of, you need writs from the tribunal. They need to operate under the tribunal's laws rather than this sort of secret cult that can do whatever the hell they want, like before.
Yeah, exactly. And now they can do it straight to Mephala again, because the whole of Morrowind is back to worshipping the reclamations,
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I wonder how that...
And if the Dark Brotherhood can't stay relevant and prevent, not kill each other and all of this, then, as I said before, there's in the story of the rise of the Night Mother, when she's visited by Sithis, and he begats her 5 children and whatnot. There is specific mention of the Void hungering for souls and all of this. So it's like an assassin's guild is always going to be essential in the mortal realm. And it always has been with the forces of chaos and stasis. You can't just have order, there always needs to be some chaos, and one form or another it's going to return.
Well, it's interesting too, in some of the books, they do reference this idea that, I don't know if I buy, but Morag Tong worshipping Sithis originally, as well, in conjunction with Mephala, which is kind of like what the Dark Brotherhood is, if you buy into the idea that Night Mother is Mephala. But I guess Sithis just being sort of an embodiment of chaos and stuff anyway, in a way, through venerating the Daedra, you kind of by default venerate a sort of more chaotic element and stuff like that. So it could be sort of related, but yeah.
The other thing as well is whatever gets worshipped gets more powerful, So it's kind of like the ancient Argonians worshipping Sithis as a destroyer, and then the modern ones worshipping him as a destroyer and a creator. If you have an assassin's guild that perceives Sithis to be super destructive, then that kind of part of him, I could imagine, can be present or at least feel real to them.
I imagine so. Yeah, I wonder how it works with some of those things that sort of predate the forces that predate, because I know that's how it works with the Aedra. But even with the Daedra, even though they choose to appear differently, they have way more autonomy.
Yeah,
over
that's true.
Their actions.
That's true.
I think the reason that we have this, there's so much mortal perceptive influence on the Aedra, is because they are kind of unconscious or sort of dead in a way, and
they're tied to nature and the forces of nature, which mortals are a part of as well. So it's almost like the way mortals' brains work does have an impact on the gods who created them.
And to be true, to be fair as well, I'm pretty sure all of the Sithis dealing stuff, he never speaks directly. It goes to the Night Mother and then to the listener. So there is no it's not like all the Dark Brotherhood members are listening to Sithis or hearing Sithis, or even the Night Mother. It's just the listener. So,
well, they think they do. A lot of them think they've heard Sithis tell them things, but it's not. It's not strong. I'm pretty sure the Crimson Scars character thought that Sithis told them to get rid of all of the non-vampires, and then no.
What a loony.
Well, it takes a special kind of mind to be associated with the Dark Brotherhood in general, I think. You know, if you're a cultist murderer, there's always the chance you're going to hear voices, you know, that seem to go hand in hand.
Yeah. But I know with the Elder Scrolls 6, it kind of depends. My only take on the Dark Brotherhood is it just depends on the time difference. If it's really close, like 2 years, I think that's kind of silly just because of how, you know, there's only, you know, Nazir Babette and like a listener and a few other like new apprentices. Having them expand into Hammerfell all of a sudden or something is just so like sudden. But maybe if it's something more like 10 years
that
or
is a
something,
lot
then
of time. 10 years is a lot of time.
Yeah.
So you never know what could happen.
Because I can imagine like what they did with Skyrim, one of the gameplay demos, and then they're like, courier comes and delivers a letter, and then it says "We know" on the thing, like the black hand. It's like everyone's like, ah!
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah. I don't know. Do you guys have anything else to say about the Brotherhood?
Not really in terms of like theory crafting type of stuff. I mean, I'm always down to talk about the actual characters and the quests and things like that. But
Actually, I was just mentioning about Sithis or something. One somewhat tangible element doesn't have to be directly related to Sithis. Like it could be created by the Night Mother or something. But the Wrath of Sithis, the big like wraith ghost thing that attacks you if in Oblivion if you betray one of the 5 tenants.
Yeah, it comes in and it comes and visits you if you basically get exiled from the guild.
But if you beat it, well then.
But if it happens 3 times, you have to defeat it, and you're still permanently exiled. Yeah,
Right,
it comes to visit you. You kill it, but obviously you can't join. It's kind of like 3 strikes and you're out. But as we see in Skyrim, they kind of stopped following the 5 tenets anyway. Like Astrid's just a very business oriented, doesn't care type person, you know? It really feels like a big gang of mercenaries in a way.
Yeah. Big edgy mercenaries.
The other thing you're talking about Sithis, there is the artifact, the Fangs of Sithis, which is like a tool used in Black Marsh of like great power from long ago, and it could like destroy the crops of enemies and do all other kinds of things. But
to relate that a little bit more too, that is interesting that the Sith, that the Argonians, you know, they've had a connection to Sithis, but then also by extension have had a connection to the Dark Brotherhood through the Shadow Scale program thing. So there's sort of a little bit extra that maybe, I wonder when that all started. Because we know it ends in like the late 4th era, the whole Shadow Scale program thing. But
yeah, there's talks in Cicero's journal of wanting it, 2 members wanting to fund it, but they didn't have the resources at the time, so they decided not to.
Yeah. All interesting stuff. But and yeah, I think that
does cover it.
Anything else?
Yeah, for sure. Although I think I will end up making this video on the Dark Brotherhood, Skyrim versus Oblivion. Yeah, I'm just vibing it. I didn't get to talk about all the quests that I wanted to, so I'm gonna make a video about it instead.
Yeah. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this Dark Brotherhood Elder Scrolls podcast. And we will be back to nerd out with you all again next time.
Or put your hands to the screen. Say, we know. Do it, Drew. There we go.